We all want a place to feel safe, right? A place where we can just be ourselves, a place to call home. It feels like such a basic, universal human need. But for a growing and, frankly, very vulnerable part of our population, LGBTQ plus seniors, that fundamental need is anything but guaranteed. Okay, let's dive into this.
Just listen to this. That's Bill Meehan, a 78-year-old man who finally found a place where he could live with pride. His words, they just get right to the heart of this whole thing, don't they? It's not just about having a roof over your head. It's about finding a place where you're seen and you're respected for exactly who you are. And that really brings us to the big question here. For so many LGBTQ plus older adults, finding that kind of safe harbor isn't a sure thing at all. It can come down to your zip code, or the personal bias of a landlord, or the fact that federal law is silent on the issue. It's basically a roll of the dice.
So to really get a handle on the problem, we first need to see what this discrimination actually looks like on the ground. It isn't always a giant, obvious sign, but its effects are felt so deeply.
Just let this number sink in for a second. 48%. Studies from groups like SAGE, who advocate for LGBTQ plus elders, have found that nearly half of all older same-sex couples have run into discrimination when they're just trying to find senior housing. That's literally a coin toss for rejection, just because of who you love.
So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, the source material shows it can be sneaky or it can be right in your face. It's things like being shown fewer available apartments than a straight couple gets to see, or being quoted higher rent for the very same unit. And in some of the worst cases, it's being harassed in common areas, or even threatened with evictions simply for living with your partner.
And this is a really tough example of how the problem goes way beyond just signing a lease. Imagine this. You're in your own community, just trying to enjoy the pool, and your neighbors start harassing you. And when you look to the staff for help, nothing. They just look the other way. Suddenly, your home itself feels hostile. Or think about this story. A woman gets her apartment. No problem at all when she has a boyfriend. But later, when she starts dating a woman, all of a sudden her housing is in jeopardy. Her spot, which was totally secure, is now hanging by a thread, all because of a landlord's prejudice. It just shows how fragile things are without clear legal protection. And this fear, it goes even deeper once people are inside long-term care facilities. Just look at this. A staggering 89% of LGBTQ plus residents believe the staff, the very people being paid to care for them, would discriminate against them. And more than 3/4 think other residents won't socialize with them. I mean, this forces so many people back into the closet when they're at their most vulnerable. Okay, so you're probably wondering, wait, aren't there laws against this? The main tool we have at the federal level is the Fair Housing Act. It's a huge piece of civil rights law. So let's take a look at what it does and, maybe more importantly, what it doesn't.
All right, so the Fair Housing Act, or FHA, was passed way back in 1968. It was a massive step forward. Its whole job is to make sure there's an equal, open housing market by making it illegal to discriminate based on a specific list of protected groups. And when it applies, it is incredibly powerful.
And you can see just how powerful it is when you look at some real cases. For example, it protected a Jewish family's right to put a mezuzah on their door. It made sure that people with disabilities could have their emotional support animals without landlords demanding extra hurdles. And it held a huge bank accountable for racist lending practices to the tune of $335 million. The FHA has some serious teeth. But here's the thing. For all its power, the FHA has a massive blind spot, a gap that leaves millions of Americans totally vulnerable and creates that roll of the dice situation we were talking about.
Michael Adams, the CEO of SAGE, he doesn't mince words. He says, "It is truly a disgrace that there is no federal law prohibiting discrimination against LGBTQ people in housing." And he's right. This isn't some tiny loophole. It's a gaping hole in our country's civil rights laws.
So this is where the problem becomes crystal clear. On the one hand, you have the classes the federal government explicitly protects, things like race, religion, disability. But then you look at what's missing. The words sexual orientation and gender identity are just not there. And that means there's no clear nationwide protection against being denied a home simply for being gay or transgender.
And that missing text,
it has a massive real-world impact. Because there isn't a federal standard, it's all left up to the states to decide. And right now, about half of all LGBTQ plus older adults live in states that also don't have these specific protections. That leaves them with pretty much no legal options if they face discrimination.
Okay, so that's the problem. But the story doesn't end there. In the face of federal inaction, people are finding other ways to build a safer future. So let's look at the path forward. Let's take a look at California, for instance. They're a great example of what states can do. They passed an LGBTQ plus Residences Bill of Rights specifically for long-term care facilities. It guarantees that people will be called by their preferred names and pronouns, that room assignments will respect their gender identity, and that no one can be kicked out or denied entry just for being who they are. These are real protections for basic dignity. And it's not just about passing laws. Communities themselves are stepping up. They're building housing that is explicitly LGBTQ affirming, like the Stonewall House we heard about earlier from Bill. These places are absolute lifelines. But, and this is a big but, the sources are really clear on this. They're still incredibly rare, and they're mostly in big cities. That leaves a lot of people out. So if you or somebody you know runs into this, what can you actually do? Well, the sources lay out a pretty clear path. First step, try to talk directly with the landlord. Sometimes it's a misunderstanding that can be cleared up. If that doesn't work, step 2 is to file a formal complaint with your local housing authority. And finally, step 3, talk to a lawyer. Even without a federal law, your state or city might have protections that give you a solid legal claim. And so, all of this leaves us with one big final question. We've seen the problem, the fear it causes, the gaps in our laws, and the first steps toward real solutions. And it makes you wonder, what will it truly take, legally, socially, and as a community, to make sure that for every single person, no matter who they are or who they love, their home is always, always a safe haven?